Get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us first thing in the morning for what I know will be a really informative presentation today. My name is Jeremy Elwood, in case you don't know me. I am the Digital Communications Manager for the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce, and also honored to be the president of the chapter this year. And joining us today are probably the two busiest people in our area, in our profession right now. So we're thrilled that they took a few minutes to talk to us today. They probably don't need an introduction, but I took the time to write one, so I'm going to give them one anyway. Cora Scott is the Director of Public Information and Civic Engagement for the City of Springfield. She joined the city in 2012. And Kathryn Wall is Public Health Information Administrator for the Springfield Greene County Health Department, having joined the department in 2014. Thank you both for taking time out of what I can only imagine is a crazy schedule to join us both today. So let me start by asking you both about coordination between your two departments. Obviously, the two of you have to work together a lot, even under normal circumstances. But how have you been working to coordinate communication efforts between your offices in the midst of the pandemic? Cora, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see fellow communicators. And if Kathryn and I sprinkle a little bit of levity in here, we want to let you know that we're doing that because we need some therapy. And that will be helpful. It's not in any way that we're discounting the situation, but we're at that point where we need some caring people who understand how weird this is. So anyway, your question, you're right. This kind of thing takes an incredible amount of coordination. And fortunately, Kathryn and I have been friends, have been colleagues for many, many years, and known each other and worked together in multiple capacities, which I think really helped a lot. But early on, I realized just from following the international news and the national news that this was a different type of crisis. And so it was going to be a little odd in that from the get-go, it really isn't well defined how you set up like an emergency management structure, like a joint information system or joint information center. So I really went to Kathryn really pretty early on, and we sat down and tried to figure out how we were going to navigate through that, creating that system of working together. And it was, it took a little bit of time for us to talk through and figure out how are we going to do that, because we knew that this would end up impacting every element of the fabric of our community. So we had to have separate roles, mine more broad and from the city perspective, and hers from the health department perspective. But that's initially what we did. And then had several conversations as we brought other people onto that team and working together.
Kathryn, how about you? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that like Cora said, it was really valuable that she and I have worked together before, from reporting side when I was a reporter, when Cora was at Mercy, when Cora was at the city, when I was here. We had kind of we had a basic understanding of how each other works as well. And I think that was really helpful to already have that relationship, to already have that understanding was so valuable. And, the way that we've kind of moved forward, and, Cora and I keep joking after this, we're quitting and writing the book and making millions off the book tour, because this is unlike anything that either of us have ever experienced in emergency communication and crisis communication. The books will be rewritten after this. It's completely different. But I think it really helped that we had that background, we had that understanding. And then also, we tried to kind of divide spheres of kind of the main go-to, because it can be really easy, especially without a really strong OEM structure, emergency management structure, that one person tries to do everything. And I think one of the things that I've really valued in this is that Cora and I are equals in this. We're talking to each other all the time. I'm more working on the healthcare and kind of disease side of things, and Cora is really handling the community wraparound of that. So I think it really helped to kind of have some of those loosely defined roles, knowing that everything we're doing over in health is affecting the community and vice versa. So I think it was a level of having some structures built, but making them very, very flexible.
Yeah, and one thing I'll point out is in that traditionally, your goal is to put one person in charge of public information, and that would not work in this type of a scenario because it's so multidimensional. But I think because Kathryn and I work really well together, we were able to figure that out. And then a third of our triad is Donna Barton with the county. So we just kind of had to work that out together.
Sure. And I'm sure it's probably helpful that both you and Donna do have backgrounds with working in the health systems as well. So
yeah, I think that did make a big difference. And then several people on my team also had worked for Mercy as well, and that definitely helped. Early on, I started to slide back into healthcare jargon. I started calling citizens patients, like everybody was a patient. And I introduced our planning and development director, Mary Lily Smith, as doctor in one of the early news conferences. So yeah, it did help having 18 years of healthcare communication background.
Sure. And as we've been talking, I've noticed we've had a few more people join us. Welcome to you all. I will say we are recording as we go here. So our plan is to put that recording up later on our website, so you'll be able to access that for members. So you've both mentioned as we've been talking that this is not like any sort of crisis that we've dealt with before. But even kind of under these most difficult circumstances, there seems to be some sort of potential for growth. So Kathryn, let me start this with you. What do you think you've learned through all of this so far that might inform or strengthen your crisis communication plans or efforts going forward, either now or in the future?
Yeah, I would consider myself a crisis communication junkie. I think it is so important you see how vital it is in these situations. And, I have a background in crisis communication. We made it through Ebola, through Zika. I hadn't been on the job very long, and we had the hepatitis A exposure. And then, of course, when I was a reporter working on the other side of crisis communication, and this is unlike anything I've experienced in my career. Talking with the folks here who've been in the business for decades of public health, this is a crisis unlike what they've seen. And so there's a lot to learn from that. I have a few key things. One of the things that I've struggled with the most is know that you are going to get things wrong. The pace of this response has been unlike anything I've ever experienced. Even some of the most stressful situations and biggest crises that we've seen before, I at least walked in the door that day knowing a general idea of when things would happen, what kind of things I should be looking for. And the pace and tempo of this, it literally changes on the half hour. I can have a great plan walking in that day and it's useless by 9:30. And that's, again, that flexibility has been really important. And understanding that what I know today isn't what I'm going to know tomorrow. There are some things that we didn't communicate correctly. There are some things that, if I could go back, I would have said different and talked about differently. And I've just had to embrace that. The thing that really, really matters right now is that our community feels that we are telling them everything we know and being as transparent as possible. And sometimes the next day I'm going to have to say, listen, what we knew yesterday and we thought was yesterday, we were very confident going in that these certain orders would be the thing. And then the governor changed it the next day. And we all had to completely rethink how we talked about stuff. I would just reiterate, build your relationships now. That has been the most valuable resource I have had in this time, is the people who know me, the people that I work closely with, being able to just jump in and go has been so, so helpful because, at no point in this response have Cora and I sat down and gone, well, let's talk about this person and who they should be. And here's what this person and their skill set. It has entirely been a group of people coming together and saying, everyone go. And people slotted into where they knew they could, they had that skill set, they knew what they needed to do, they understood our business and the overall situation. So those relationships were incredibly valuable. And then the thing that I think is really interesting is this, is a lot of the things that I have learned to depend on in crisis communication, I no longer have access to. One of the most heartbreaking things to me from a communication side, from a structural side, is that in any other crisis I've worked in public health, I can always depend on CDC to keep me informed. During Ebola, during Zika, even in the first few months of this response, January and February, I was on daily calls with CDC to understand the world and to understand what was going on around us. CDC has not done one of those calls since March 8th. So I have no connection, no authoritative connection to what's happening in the broader US, what's happening in the world. I'm depending on media stories right now and hoping I can find that the information, the authoritative information. That's really difficult. To not have that backstop that I can't point people to and say, hey, this is what the authorities say. Our team is amazing and has stepped up and has made that work and has used their expertise to understand and to be that authoritative voice. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've had the success that we have with our communication, is that I'm very fortunate that my leadership are very transparent and really deeply care about communication. And that has made a huge difference.
Sure. Cora, what about you? What are you taking away from all this?
Sure. Like I said early on, I recognized that this was a different kind of crisis than I had certainly ever dealt with in the 26 years I've been doing crisis communication. Fortunately, I had a great relationship with Lisa Cox, who is the Chief Communications Officer for the State Health Department. She worked with me at Mercy and then worked with me here at the city. I hired her over here, working in police. And she told me something early on that kind of jolted me and made me realize the magnitude of this. She told me when we had our first case in Greene County, and we've been moving nonstop since then, I would say. That was like the trigger point, for which it's been pretty much 24/7. She said, Cora, this is like the Joplin tornado is hitting every day for multiple days in a row. And I thought at the time, I really had a hard time absorbing that, because I had a hard time believing that that would be true, but it absolutely was true. Certainly not from the death and the devastation, but from the standpoint of how it's disrupting our community, our state, our nation, and how we as communicators have to get around that. And I think communicators are some of the most resilient people, because we have to multitask like nobody else, and we have to have feelers out there and figure things out on the fly and go. I underestimated how disruptive this type of a crisis could be among my own staff, among the city staff, among the community. So there were people who really had to take a time out, had to step out, because it's so enduring. It's not like an incident happens and then you're responding to the incident and you're recovering from the incident. It's like a marathon of sprints. Every single day you're sprinting, and then the marathon, is going to go on for a really long time. So I also learned that really at the beginning and into today, the incident that we're responding to, and the fire chief is the one who came up with this, is fear. So the incident that we're responding to in our community is fear. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like it's not just unwarranted fear. It is actually fear based on facts and what is and could happen. So I had to take a step back and think about that and communicate with everybody from my own staff all the way out to the larger community, keeping in mind that the incident is fear. And hope and thank goodness people are listening, and our leaders are taking bold steps with that stay-at-home order, that it's helping to flatten our curve, because actually we've been bracing ourselves for the other incident, which would be the surge of patients. And so that's been in the back of my mind, and that's been in my heart, and that's the thing that has actually scared me the most, just kind of knowing what that would look like and seeing what it was happening around the country. But so the takeaways are that a public health crisis is the worst of all. It really is, because it affects every function of your community. And we could go on, but the ripple effects and the multiple crises on top of one another. You know, we had that active shooter that took off this was really close to the time that we had our first case in Greene County. We had an active shooter, and then he ended up killing a police officer and 5 citizens. And so that was an unrelated but crisis on top of the crisis. So you really have to build some resiliency among your team to be prepared for really, really challenging set of circumstances.
Absolutely. So to everyone who's here, say, if you think of any questions as we're talking, maybe drop those into the chat. We might have a couple of minutes at the end here that we could pick up 1 or 2 of those. The one more question I have, I feel like we'd be missing out on an opportunity with all of these communicators and communications professionals gathered in one place if we didn't ask the 2 of you what we could do to help you continue to get the word out. I mean, how can we help the 2 of you?
I appreciate that very much. And since the majority of the incident is fear, helping make sure that accurate information is what's out in the community, sharing that and doing that within your own organizations and sharing it out with the community, I think is the main thing. And a lot of you have already been doing this, pointing things back to Kathryn and I. If you see something out there and it doesn't seem right, and making sure that people get the accurate information, that is actually very helpful.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add, I totally agree with Cora. You know, one of the things that I appreciate about having groups like this is that, you know, I can see when you all point people back to us, when you go, no, I'm pretty sure Kathryn wouldn't say that. You know, those kind of things has been really helpful. But I also just want to say it's been incredibly helpful and buoying to hear from people and just say, hey, you're doing a great job, or even I'm thinking of you, all of that stuff. You know, this is really tough. This is emotionally really tough. Clay's not kidding when he says that we take every death personally, and that's been really hard. And then, of course, you know, we all know that social media, online commenting can just steal your soul. And so it's been incredibly helpful, and it really helps our entire health department team. We send out, you know, when someone quotes on social media that, hey, we just want you to know you guys are doing a great job, that kind of thing really, really helps. And so, you know, we really appreciate those. I know so many of you have reached out and just sent a note that like, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. Clay's doing a great job. Those kind of things really help.
I agree. Definitely.
Sort of any beacon of positivity right now is probably extremely helpful. So, well, we said 8:30, and I don't want to keep you guys incredibly long, but we do have a few minutes. I want to throw it open to our members here if anybody has any questions. I haven't seen any come in through the chat yet. While we're waiting for that, I'll personally ask the 2 of you if there's any one particular moment or I don't want to say incident because that's the wrong word, but is there one particular moment throughout all of this that really has kind of stuck with the 2 of you, that maybe it was the first time that told you that this is really something that we've never dealt with before, or something that it's a new animal for us? When was the moment that really kind of pointed that out to you?
I would say one significant moment was when we announced the stay-at-home order, and first of all, just knowing what that meant to the community and having to shut down businesses and restaurants still gets me teary-eyed, just the magnitude of it. So I think literally City Council was meeting and making those decisions, ultimately the mayor's decision on the city order. And we had planned to do a news conference to announce it because we wanted to announce it as soon as possible for Clay's guidance. We needed to go into that stay-at-home order, and thank God we did when we did, because I think having that happen so early and suppressing the activity made a difference in our disease stopping the spread of the virus for sure. But when we announced it, right after, like within an hour after, we had a call center set up and we were ready to go, and we knew we had literally just finished the order. So it's a legal order. It's hard to interpret. We already had, I was writing the FAQ while I was in the meeting, but when we announced it, and then immediately our phone bank crashed and our website crashed, that was literally my oh shit moment. I don't know about Kathryn, but that one really scared me. And now as we look to the future and how that stay-at-home order will change, I'm doing things a little bit differently, or suggesting things a little bit differently. For instance, doing a live Q&A, and hopefully the TV stations will cover it so the most people can see the answers to the most questions, if that makes sense. And I've never had to do that before, and it's really scary because you really don't know the complete interpretation. But we're also taking steps, like Kathryn and I, as communicators, are literally in the meetings where the orders are being worked on, which we kind of had to argue to be in. But we really need to know that information in real time, because it's just going to escalate out really quickly.
Yeah, I think for me, mine was earlier, just knowing from the public health side of things. The communication side, I totally agree. We were sitting in at OEM going, everything is broken. Every single thing we can use to communicate has broken at the same moment. And it was horrifying. But from a public health perspective, back in February, Clay pulled a core team together on a Saturday morning and said, listen, this is it. This is the moment we've warned you about. This is the thing that we've been anxiously preparing for in public health for decades. You know, and generally speaking, we as a society were due for a pandemic. And so we had all been kind of watching each thing, you know, when SARS popped up and MERS popped up and Ebola and Zika, all of these things, you know, we saw them coming, we recognized what they were, and they were controlled pretty quickly. Clay recognized very early on that this was something that would take a much bigger response to control. So that to me was, you know, it was a big moment, even to, quite honestly, to be called in on a Saturday morning to have this conversation. My bosses really deeply care about work-life balance. That's out the window now. I mean, that doesn't exist anymore. But before this moment, they really cared about work-life balance. You know, we get called on a weekend when it's something big and important. To have something, I think the meeting was at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. I knew, you know, this is it. This is that moment. And then following that fairly soon, you know, we were working really hard to get people to take it seriously. How do we get people to take it seriously? And then we saw a complete change when Tom Hanks got sick. That changed everything for people.
Yeah.
When America's dad is sick, everyone gets worried about it.
Mr. Rogers is sick.
Mr. Rogers is sick. And so that to me was a complete shift from trying to get people to take it seriously to trying to get to people not to panic. It was overnight, this immediate, complete change in strategy.
Yeah.
I also think we're at a really dangerous time right now, because we're starting to hear people, and I alluded to this at the very beginning of the call before everybody joined, we're starting to get threats to the city and to the mayor, because there's a certain group of people, government conspiracy theorists, that think that the virus isn't real. The government's just doing this to take control of their lives. So you can imagine how that group is spun up at this time. And since we're not seeing the cases, thankfully, it's working. You know, it's hard to conclusively prove prevention, right? Now that group is really starting to spin up, and that scares me a little bit. And we've got to keep our community leaders understanding the importance of staying the course and not having a backslide as we try to step out of this in a measured way. But I'm really proud of our community for listening. Our traffic counts proved early on that people were paying attention, they were staying home. Kathryn's right, it helped that we saw people, celebrities on the coast that were talking about this, and the crisis was bigger and ahead of ours, and I think that helped too. But I hope Springfieldians, Greene Countyans continue to heed the warnings and do what's right as we move through these next phases.
Sure. And we have had a couple of questions come in. I know we've just got a few minutes, but might hit one or two of them. Someone asked just kind of to follow up with Kathryn, what you said about the social media issue. What has been useful in terms of social media, and how have you had to kind of manage the social media aspect of everything as all this has been going on?
I'm really grateful that my leadership really early on said we have to build the website, like the website, coronavirus website. It can't just be coronavirus is an illness, stay home. It is a huge, expansive, changes every day, most of the time, multiple times a day resource. And that's been really helpful to have something to point people back to. The stuff that we're seeing on social media most often is people just trying to find some normalcy within a stay-at-home order, and how can they do that? Can I go and do this thing? Can I see these people? Can I help? So much of it that we are seeing is how can I help? And then there's always a subset. There's always going to be that subset of these, folks who have this great constitutional knowledge and somehow have this great public health knowledge that are just sitting at home. And I wish they were here, because if they have so much information about constitutional law and decades of public health expertise. And you're going to get that. You're going to meet the folks who you read an article and believe they understand the science better than the folks that we have. And a lot of it has been just trying to maintain that levity among our staff. We have made a point of, we try to kind of have shifts so that there's not one person who is getting all the social media vitriol all the time. I mean, that really weighs on you. And some of it has just been acknowledging that we are not going to fix everyone's problems. In public health, we cannot solve everything of every aspect. It's too big of an issue. And so we've had to acknowledge that some people are just going to be mad, and they need to be mad at something, and that's going to be us. And just kind of embracing that.
One other practical thing that we did is, we have, I don't even know, a dozen or so social media channels across all the city departments. And so we opened those up and let our communicators specifically be assigned to monitor those and help answer questions when they could, but even more importantly, to point to the actual identified experts, like who could interpret the stay-at-home order, or if it was a health question, where those needed to go, and those sorts of things. I also had Chris Swatters-Milligan reach out to me in the middle of this and say, is there anything I can do? And that's always a good question to ask of any other, if you're on the outside, a nice note that says, gosh, I know what you're going through. My heart's with you. Let me know if there's anything you can, we can do, or I can do. Because if at that moment in time, we might have something. And I asked her to monitor social media just during that particular very hectic moment. And she was very helpful. And she did some intel and was able to get us some information that I thought was helpful. I also realized something that, you won't always have the time, if you're leading the communication effort within either your department or your organization or the community or whatever, to sit down and make out assignments for everybody. So I told my team, we started doing Zoom calls every day. And at the beginning of the day, I'm like, your job is to figure out what your job is, okay? You've got to be paying attention to what we're saying out in the community, watch what's going on in social media, and then start sending me ideas in the Slack account, which, Andrea, thank you for recommending that. That has been a lifesaver, using Slack. And send me ideas, create your graphics. We need to stay on top of this from multiple fronts. And so if you have innovative and creative people that you can trust, tell them to please, step up to the table. And I'm really proud of my multimedia team here at the city for doing that.
It sounds like it just, even though this crisis is so different from a lot of others, as with most crises, a lot of the most important work is done before the crisis ever happens, in terms of making sure you have the people around you that you can rely on and trust, and having those relationships in place with people in other organizations and other departments that you can turn to at a moment's notice and say, I need your help, go, and not have to worry about laying out complicated plans other than just saying, can you handle this, and know that they're on it. So,
Right.
yeah. So, well, we want to be mindful of your time, what little there is of it, I'm sure. But it is 8:30. So, so thank you both. And not just for joining us, but for everything that you and your teams are doing right now. It's incredibly important work that's being done, and we want you to know how appreciative we all are of your efforts. So thank you both for that.
Thank you.
And to our members that are here, I wanted to let you know that we're doing our best to continue stay engaged and share knowledge with you as best we can, even if it's from my palatial home office / spare bedroom that you can see behind me. So, so thank you all for joining us here, and be safe, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.